When you grow up, chances are you won't work just one job. And when you move from one job to another, the polite thing to do will be to explain to your employer your reason for leaving. On July 4th, 1776, British colonists living in America decided to quit not their jobs, but their country. They sent a written notice of this decision to the British King George III, explaining that his bad treatment of the colonies was their main reason for leaving. This little piece of paper started a war, and I'm sure you've heard of it. It was called the Declaration of Independence. Remember the First Continental Congress? That very long meeting of delegates from all across the American colonies who put their heads together in Philadelphia to decide what to do about the British? Well, a year later, a similar group of men just like that one, 65 of them in total from all 13 colonies, met again in Philadelphia in 1775 to form the Second Continental Congress, another very long meeting. Within a year, this Congress would produce the Declaration of Independence. Now, by 1775, fighting had already broken out between American colonists and British troops. The colonists, however, lacked a real army. Rather, they were divided into many local groups called militias, made up of untrained volunteer soldiers. One of the first decisions at this Congress was to whip up an official fighting force called the Continental Army. They were, after all, facing off against one of the most deadly militaries in the entire world, the British. While the British Army had more money, weapons, and resources, the Americans did have the benefit of excellent leadership. As general of the Continental Army, the Congress chose a seasoned veteran who had proved himself years earlier in the French and Indian War. I'm sure you recognize him. Even after forming the Continental Army, many delegates at the Congress, and many colonists in general, still weren't sure about breaking away from Britain. It was, after all, their country. Enter a man named Thomas Paine, who wrote a very influential pamphlet called Common Sense, a pamphlet that sold like crazy among the colonists. And in this pamphlet, Thomas Paine made a fairly straightforward argument. He said that it was a no-brainer that no group of people anywhere should let a king tell them what to do. Those people instead should govern themselves. This idea may not surprise you, since you live in a country where the individual citizens have a big say in government, but at the time, this notion was revolutionary. Kings and queens had ruled nations in Europe for as long as anyone could remember. But by the summer of 1776, with more and more colonists coming around to Paine's ideas, the Congress reached a decision, and they decided it was time. It was time for the colonies to break away from the king and govern themselves as independent states. So how long does it take to write a Declaration of Independence? Measuring from the day Congress decided to have one written to the day it was written and approved? The answer is 1 month. You might think that all the delegates would start arm wrestling each other, seeing who would get to write this super special document. But getting all the words down just right was actually considered by many to be a tedious task, and so Congress handpicked a small committee of 5 men to tackle the job. And it was the rookie of the group, the youngest member of that committee, who wound up doing the bulk of the writing. I'll give you a hint. His face is on the front of the $2 bill. One of his chief editors on the small committee would be another recognizable face for any of you who have carried the big ones. The committee presented its work to the rest of Congress, and on July 4th, 1776, the Declaration of Independence was approved. Couriers quickly carried copies of the Declaration from one end of the colonies to the other. Plenty of colonists were still loyal to the British king, but those who weren't, the patriots, were all about the Declaration. And now, there was no turning back for the Americans. The Declaration of Independence was a statement of war against their mother country. To declare themselves independent states, no longer a part of Great Britain, was treason, the highest crime possible against their government and king and nation. The British Army and Navy headed straight for these rebels, hoping to teach them a lesson, while the new United States of America mustered their best defenses. The king intended to get his colonies right back. As for the patriots in America, they would be fighting for their freedom. and this strong cause in many ways would make up for the underdog status of the Continental Army.